the story so far. On September 25th, we dealt with the science of climate change, and we looked at ways of generating energy sustainably. Today, we're going to talk about sustainable transportation. I have a lot of data, and I'm going to throw a lot of data at you. So I'm quoting the favorite saying of data scientist Ben Sullins, "When you free the data, your mind will follow." I hope it's not too warm in here for your mind to follow all the data that I'm going to throw at you. Transportation using these vehicles is not sustainable. Large sedans, crossovers, SUVs, and trucks are not sustainable forms of transportation for the coming years. And even bigger challenges are other forms of transportation, as you can see here. So our outline today and next week will be as follows. Why electrify at all? Why can't we just do incremental improvements as we've been doing for the last 50 years, decreasing weight, increasing efficiency? We'll look at the evolution of battery electric vehicles and contrast them with internal combustion engine vehicles. Get used to those abbreviations because they'll appear on most of the slides from now on. How do battery electric vehicles differ from internal combustion engine vehicles? We're going to look at the currently available battery electric vehicles in the US and compare their specifications. So if you're interested in getting one, it'll help you decide which one to get. And finally, today, we'll look at the safety of all the available battery electric vehicles in the US. Next week, we'll look at the charging infrastructure for electric cars, some electric car myths, and if there's time, a little bit about autonomous vehicles. And then we'll get into the rest of the transportation system: buses, trucks, taxis, motorcycles and bicycles, boats, ferries and ships, trains, and even planes. So let's start with why electrify. As we saw on September 25th, 2016 was a watershed year when emissions from transportation exceeded emissions from electricity generation for the first time since the 1970s. And why is this? Well, we know that the grid is getting cheaper, but the global car market is dirty. And particularly because more SUVs were sold globally than any other vehicle type, which surprised me. I would have thought that small cars would have been the biggest sellers. But apparently no, SUVs are the biggest sellers. And Eunice, if you're here, I did not put that apostrophe in the plural of SUV. Notice what a small fraction is represented by electric cars. Now that's globally. What about in the US? This is a data-busy graph, but just concentrate, not graph, table. Concentrate on this line, which represent car sales, and this line, which represent light-duty trucks. The subdivisions of cars are pretty obvious. The subdivisions of light-duty trucks are pickups, crossovers, vans, and SUVs. And let's concentrate on this box here, which represents year-to-date for the first quarter, January, February, March of this year. In the first quarter of this year, 1,374,000 odd cars were sold, compared with twice that number of light-duty trucks in these categories. So that the ratio of trucks to cars was 2-to-1, or to put it a different way, the number of trucks sold represented 2/3 of the total number of vehicles sold. Notice that there's been a 10% drop in sales of cars compared with the first quarter of last year, but a 9.8% increase in the number of trucks sold compared with the same quarter last year. How do we then equate all this with the consumption of energy by the US transportation system? Road vehicles consumed almost 80% of energy consumed by the transportation sector, whereas everything else consumed only 20%. Two surprising things for me, although I shouldn't have been surprised, I guess, given what I've said in the last couple of slides, is that in the US, light trucks were the biggest consumers of transportation energy, way ahead of cars and motorcycles. And just as surprising, heavier trucks consume just as much energy as cars and motorcycles, which I guess you could appreciate every time you drive on I-5. This is not I-5, although it feels like it sometimes. This is actually somewhere in Southeast Asia, judging by the language on that sign. But let's look at cars and trucks in more detail now. In the US, the best-selling vehicles are trucks. Not surprising from what I've just said. And the same three trucks have been the best-selling vehicles in the US in 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017. And those were the Ford F-Series, the Chevrolet Silverado, and the Dodge Ram, all of these being trucks, and these sold almost 2 million of them alone, and just these three cars, truck models last year. If you compare total truck sales in the US year by year, we'll see a big drop here during the economic meltdown in 2008, interrupting the otherwise rapid increase in truck sales, but then rapid increases resumed up till 2017, last year, when over 11 million trucks were sold out of a total vehicle sales figure of 17 million. Again, representing about 2/3 of the total number of vehicles sold in the US in 2017. This is an interesting statistic. At the beginning of 2017, the Ford Series trucks led all US vehicle sales for the 35th consecutive year. 2017 made that the 36th consecutive year, and 2018 is on track to make that the 37th consecutive year. Why is that a problem? This is why. Because the lowest duty Ford truck, the F-150, has a combined gas mileage, combined city highway, of 20 miles per gallon or less. Ford does not release its gas mileage for the heavier duty trucks in the F-Series because the government does not require them to, believe it or not. In 2016, the F-Series underwent a tremendous overhaul costing over $1 billion. But despite that, some versions of the F-150 still do not meet emissions or miles per gallon requirements that were in effect back in 2016, And the problem's getting worse for Ford because by 2025, the corporate average fuel economy is going to rise to 54.5 miles per gallon. This is a problem for Ford because the F-150 represents 31% of Ford's North American sales and 33% of its profits. So what does Ford do? It doubles down on trucks, SUVs, and crossovers, and it's dropping all its passenger car models except the Mustang. Unbelievable. It's dropping the Fiesta, the Focus, and the Fusion, and the Taurus, keeping only the Mustang, and in 2020, it will introduce not a car, but a crossover. Unbelievable. Well, we know what effects transportation emissions have on global warming, but there has not been enough attention paid to their effects on our health. So let's look at that. Air pollution from cars and trucks produces particulate matter, hydrocarbons, mostly raw fuel, nitrogen oxide, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and as we've said before, carbon dioxide, but as well a series of organic toxins, mainly benzene, acetaldehyde, and 1,3-butadiene, which have these really bad effects on our health. I want to say a few words about particulate matter, particularly small diameter particles which are produced in vehicle exhaust. Traditionally, diesel-powered vehicles have produced 2/3 of all particulate matter from US transportation sources, plus about half of all nitrogen oxides. But a new problem is what's known as gasoline direct injection, introduced in 2008 and now present in most cars built since then. And it was introduced to increase power, but it has a bad side effect of increased small particulate matter, which now represents 10 to 100 times more small particles than the latest heavy-duty diesels equipped with particulate filters. Modern diesels now have particulate filters, so they're better than the old ones, but now direct injection cars and trucks are worse than current diesels. What effect does particulate matter have on our health? Premature death, heart attacks, cardiac arrhythmias, worsening asthma, impaired lung function, chronic bronchitis. The Health Effects Institute estimated that in 2016, air pollution from cars and trucks and other sources, but mainly cars and trucks, resulted in 6.1 million premature deaths worldwide. Time magazine estimated that in 2017, there were 1,610,000 million premature deaths in India and 1.58 million premature deaths in China. In the US, it's been estimated that 200,000 premature deaths occur per year. And one look at Los Angeles back in 2009, when smog was very bad, makes that easy to believe. As a result, these 12 cities have announced bans of entry of all gas-powered cars by the year 2030. These countries listed here will ban the sales of all gas-powered cars within this time span. And 3 additional jurisdictions, California, Ireland, and China, are going to ban the sales of all gas-powered cars by unspecified dates. But it's interesting that China has already halted the production of 553 different car models, including those from Audi, Mercedes, and Chevrolet. So they're serious. Something that you may not be aware of is this nasty side effect resulting from the introduction of key fobs instead of ignition keys for starting and stopping cars. Because engines are now relatively quiet, when you get home and park in your garage, you may forget that your engine is on, and you may forget to turn it off, as more than 24 people have found to their sorrow, because they were killed by exhaust that leaked into their homes when they forgot to turn off their car engines because their key fobs were in their pockets. Are electric cars really more polluting as internal combustion cars, as some people have claimed? And this answers Steve's question. I don't know if Steve's here, but I'm going to answer your question in detail. If you just look at everyday driving, there's this handy calculator that allows you to look at your own zip code and compare pollution from daily driving by electric cars, hybrids, and gas cars. The average battery electric car in daily driving produces 108 grams of carbon dioxide equivalent per mile. The equivalent figure for hybrids is 184, and for gas cars, 381, more than 3 times the figure for electric cars. This refers to carbon-only pollution, not all the other pollutants that we've mentioned. And you can plug in your own zip code here to get your own figures. And there's the URL that you go to do that. And if you're interested, I can send you this later. If you charge from renewable power, or subscribe to the green power programs that your utility offers, your driving can be virtually emission-free. The Union of Concerned Scientists published this map in 2009, showing that in the Northwest region, driving an electric car is equivalent to driving a gas car with a miles per gallon of 73. A little better in California, a lot better up in New York State, where it's equivalent to an 115 mile per gallon gas car. Notice how relatively poor it is in the center of the country, where the grid is dirtier. In 2016, things improved as the grid got cleaner, and we now have an equivalent a gas car with 96 miles per gallon in the Northwest region, and up in New York State has improved to an equivalent gas car with 191 miles per gallon. Okay, so much for pollution. Let's look at the evolution of electric cars from, believe it or not, the 19th century. The first production electric car was introduced by Thomas Parker in London in 1884. And here it is. It looks like a converted horse-drawn hearse. Not very sexy. The first electric car in Germany came 4 years later, produced by Andreas Flocken, and called the Flocken Elektrowagen in 1888. Let me get rid of that. Come on. Sorry about that. Somewhat better coach work. Check out these cool headlights and this avant-garde rear fender. The first electric car in the USA was produced by William Morrison in 1890, 6 years after the first one in London, and apparently borrowing a lot from the design of the London car. It appeared in Des Moines, Idaho in 1890, and it was called the Morrison Electric. I like this photo because it shows how the man in the street was dressed in 1890 in a suit, waistcoat, tie, and bowler hat. Compare that with how the man in the street is dressed today. And check out this remarkably modern-looking bicycle. The first successful U.S. electric car company appeared in Philadelphia, made by Morris and Salome, and it was very basic, I guess, in order to get the cost down. It was called the Electrobat and appeared in 1894. You may not know this, but the first Porsche was electric, designed by the original Ferdinand Porsche 120 years ago. It was resurrected from a warehouse in Austria in 2014, 116 years after it came into service. And get this, its electric motor still ran. In 1913, Thomas Edison invented the nickel-ion battery, and it was applied to an electric car, the Detroit EV. And here is the great man himself inspecting his nickel-ion battery in the Detroit EV in 1913. Unfortunately, the early electric cars disappeared, and there are several reasons for that. They coincided with the appearance of cheap gasoline as a result of the discovery of oil in Pennsylvania and the first commercial oil well in 1859, just before electric cars appeared on the scene. Something else you may not know is that the first production line for automobile production was introduced not by Henry Ford, but by Ransom Olds, who was known for the Oldsmobile. But Henry Ford, with the Model T, made the first gas car affordable. I'm talking only about gas cars here. The first mass production, the first automobile, were gas cars. Originally, gas cars could not really be driven by women because they had to be crank-started, which was quite difficult. So women didn't buy or drive electric gas cars. But the invention of the electric starter in 1912, for the first time, allowed women to drive and to buy gas cars. The big problem with the old electric cars was limited speed and limited range. So when interurban road construction resulted in lots of roads between cities in the 1920s, gas cars outcompeted electric cars, and electric cars disappeared. But then, in 1996, General Motors resurrected the electric car. They called it the EV1, and here it is. Its original battery was a lead-acid battery, which gave it a range of 60 miles, but subsequent iterations equipped it with a nickel metal hydride battery, which substantially improved the range. Unfortunately, General Motors killed the electric car. Why? Electric cars were all leased, and at the end of the lease, GM recalled all their cars and crushed them. Why? Because it was less profitable to make electric cars than to make gas cars. Surprise, surprise. In fact, destroying them was cheaper than even supporting them. So nothing happened until 2003, when a couple of entrepreneurs named Mark Tarpenning and Martin Eberhard started a small company called Tesla Motors, the precursor of modern Tesla. They got an English sports car called the Lotus Elise and took out the gas engine and replaced it with the T0 electric motor and control system from a Los Angeles company named AC Propulsion. Unfortunately, it didn't work very well, so they had to redesign the electric power system from scratch. The next year, Elon Musk became a major investor, and 4 years later, he became the CEO. In that year, 2008, the Tesla Roadster was finally released to the public, and a really good-looking car, the first car to use lithium-ion batteries, and the first to go more than 200 miles on a single charge. In fact, it had an EPA rating of 244 miles, and great acceleration, great top speed. Unfortunately, it was very expensive, a little over $100,000, because it was a limited run and they were hand-built. Only a few thousand were sold. 2 years later, Nissan brought out the Nissan Leaf, shown here, a rather cute-looking car, and we'll look at its specifications a little later. 2 years after the Leaf came the Tesla Model S, a really good-looking car with very good range, currently 335 miles, and incredible acceleration, better than most supercars, and it started to be produced in large numbers, but it was still very expensive. 2 years after the Model S, BMW brought out the i3, which in my humble opinion is one of the ugliest cars on the road. Apologies to anyone here who owns an i3. It was also quite expensive because the body is made of carbon fiber. We'll look at its specifications a little later also. The same year, Tesla brought out its Model X, which was noteworthy because of its falcon wing doors, incorrectly called by most motor writers gull wing doors. But they differ from gull wing doors, and the difference is illustrated in this video.
So I don't know if you can see well here, but there's only about a few inches separating the side mirrors on each side of the car. So we're going to open the falcon wing doors when there's barely enough room to squeeze between the two cars.
Almost no clearance from the car on either side, but the doors will still open, which is unlike gull wing doors. Another interesting feature of the Model X is its towing capacity. Nominally only 5,000 pounds, but it can tow a lot more than that, as illustrated by this video, which shows the Model X pulling a semi up a snowy hill. It's a little hard to see the tow rope on this video. It's more obvious on the original video. But it successfully pulled that semi up the hill. Early last year, Chevrolet came up with its second act, the Chevrolet Bolt, its second electric car. Not as ugly as the i3, but in my opinion, it doesn't win any beauty contests either. Again, we'll look at its specifications a bit later. Late in 2017, Tesla introduced its so-called mass market car, the Model 3, which is pretty good looking car, although I'm not very enthusiastic about the front end design. However, it was introduced for aerodynamic purposes. Its CD, coefficient of drag, is 0.21, which is the lowest coefficient of drag of any car on the market. So this apparent blunt end doesn't do much to harm the aerodynamic properties. A little look into the near future. The next generation Tesla Roadster is going to blow every other car, electric or gas, off the map. This is not vaporware. These cars have been built and the specifications have been confirmed by independent experts. Very good-looking car, but look at the specifications of a $200,000 Tesla Roadster compared with a $3 million Bugatti Chiron. The Roadster is the first production car, to get below 2 seconds for 0 to 60 miles an hour. It also beats the Bugatti to 100 miles an hour and over the quarter mile. Tesla is not revealing the top speed yet, so we're not sure about that. But look at the torque difference, 7,300 plus pounds-feet for the Roadster compared with 1,100 plus for the Bugatti. The Bugatti gas mileage is miserable because it's got a huge engine. The gas mileage of the Roadster is about 100 miles per gallon equivalent, which gives it a range of 620 miles, more than double the range of any electric car on the market, compared with a respectable but comparatively very poor range of the supercar by Bugatti. Okay, that's enough about the history. How do battery electric cars really differ from gas cars? We'll look at a number of ways. Most of all by efficiency. The internal combustion engine has an efficiency of 18 to 20%. Most of the energy is not transferred to the wheels, but goes off as heat. The electric motor has an efficiency of 85 to 97%. This is the well-known graph of torque and power for a gas car. I want to concentrate on torque, because torque is what you feel when you drive a car, either electric or gas, responsible for its ability to take off quickly and to accelerate. Torque is low at low RPM in a gas car, comes to a peak between 3,000 and 4,000 RPM, and then drops off very quickly to maximum RPM. Power comes in pretty late, almost at maximum RPM. Now compare this with the equivalent curves for an electric motor. Torque is 100% from stationary. So as soon as you start off from a standstill, you get 100% of torque, and that persists all the way through to maximum RPM. The power continuously increases to maximum RPM, but what you feel is the torque, and that's what gives the electric car its incredible acceleration. Here is the typical Ford muscle car engine compared with the Tesla muscle car motor. You can see the difference in size, but there's also a big difference in specifications. The Ford muscle car has a horsepower of 395, unless you look at the after-car modifications, which takes horsepower higher, compared with 588 horsepower for the Tesla car. The torque for the Tesla is more than double the torque for the Ford muscle car. Gas mileage is pretty miserable for the Ford, excellent for the most powerful Tesla, the P100D Model S. The warranty for the Ford muscle car is okay, but can't compare the warranty for the Tesla most powerful car, which goes out to unlimited miles, infinite miles over 8 years, compared with 60,000 miles over 5 years for the Ford. And a huge difference in estimated life, 250,000 miles for the Ford, 1 million miles estimated life for the Tesla. No Teslas have got to 1 million miles yet, but some of them are getting pretty close. So to summarize the characteristics of electric versus gas cars, well, I think most of you are aware that electric cars are quiet. Gas cars can be moderately to terribly noisy. The center of gravity for an electric car is below the floor because that's where the batteries are, where most of the weight is. So that gives an electric car excellent handling characteristics. The center of gravity for a gas car is variable. I won't have time to talk about one-pedal driving, but that's my second favorite characteristic of an electric car after the beneficial effect on the environment. You really cannot appreciate driving an electric car until you've appreciated the one-pedal driving. If there's time in the questions, I'll go into that. One-pedal driving results from regenerative braking of the electric car. When you lift your foot off the accelerator pedal, the electric motor changes from a motor to a generator. The electric generation gets its energy from the kinetic energy of the car, so that makes the car slow down. So you can slow the car simply by lifting your foot off the accelerator pedal. That's very handy when you're on a 6% downgrade for the next 6 miles, as you often encounter on a trip. You don't have to use the brakes at all in an electric car, whereas in the typical gas car, you're using the brakes frequently on that sort of downgrade. As a result, the brakes on an electric car pretty much last for the life of the car, whereas for a gas car, you're relatively frequently replacing the disc pads and sometimes the discs. With an all-wheel electric car, the balance between the front and rear wheels is governed electronically millisecond to millisecond. With an all-wheel gas car, the mechanical linkage is much slower. We've already talked about the torque, which is immediate in an electric car and delayed in a gas car. A gas car has between 4 and 12 gears, depending on the model. So you have to change gears either manually or with an automated transmission as you accelerate, which slows down the acceleration. There's only one gear in a gas car which gears down from the RPM of the electric motor to the RPM of the wheels. You don't have to change gear at all as you accelerate in an electric car. There's a significant difference, as we've already seen, in the fuel costs. Air pollution by gas cars gets dirtier as the car ages. It gets cleaner from electric cars as the electric grid gets cleaner. The typical drivetrain, the engine and the transmission of a gas car consists of many hundreds of individual parts. In an electric car, typically there are only 20 individual parts. the battery life doesn't apply to a gas car, but as we'll see in a minute, the Tesla battery suffers only 6% degradation in 250,000 miles. Another nice feature of electric cars, at the moment only the Tesla, is that you get regular over-the-air updates, just like your iPhone, which continuously improves the capabilities and performance. About twice a month, I get an update on my car, which improves the car with every update. So you're not logged into the characteristics of the car once you buy it. It continues to improve as you continue to own it. There's a huge difference in the maintenance requirements of electric cars versus gas cars. Not much difference in the tires. The brakes last almost forever, as we mentioned. None of the rest of the requirements to maintain a gas car apply to an electric car, as you can see here. I won't go into all of these, but those of you who have owned a gas car for any length of time are painfully aware of all of these requirements. An estimate of the fuel costs, which assume 25 miles per gallon of a gas car, will have you buying 4,000 gallons over 100,000 miles. So you're going to spend about $16,000 in a gas car. Your electricity cost to charge an electric car will vary by state, but they will always be cheaper than a gas car. Ben Sullins, whose quotation I started off with at the beginning, produced this display of a comparison between the 5-year maintenance and repair costs of 3 large German gas cars compared with 3 maintenance plans, which includes repairs for Tesla models, of all Tesla models, the Model S and the Model X, but about to be announced also the Model 3. Tesla has 4-year prepaid plans at $2,400 or for an 8-year prepaid plan for $3,800. Remember, the battery and drivetrain are warranted for 8 years or unlimited miles, compared with these costs for the premium German sedans. A little more expensive for the Model X than for the Model S, but still way below the Germans. Here's a calculator that you can use to plug in your own vehicle miles per gallon, the cost of fuel that you're paying. Over 30,000 miles, you'll pay an average for these statistics of over $5,000 for gas, compared with $900 to charge an electric car, using the national average of 11 cents per kilowatt hour, which since then has gone up to 13 cents, but still a huge difference. The big current disadvantage of electric cars is the price. So let's look at that in a bit more detail. Currently, battery electric cars are more expensive than the equivalent gas car. But Morgan Stanley has predicted that by 2025, there will be price parity. But that applies only to the upfront cost and doesn't take into account savings on fuel and maintenance, which I predict will make price parity earlier than 2025. This is a calculator that shows the current and predicted differences from 2016 to 2030 from the small segment gas and electric cars to the medium segment, large segment, and SUV segment. The yellow line represents the average prices of internal combustion cars in each segment. And you'll notice, probably best seen here, that it slowly increases as cost increases are required to implement incremental improvements in gas mileage. So the price of the body and the powertrain of the gas and electric cars doesn't change much over this time span, but the cost of the battery falls precipitously in all cases. And somewhere between 24 and 26, the total cost will get below the average gas car cost, as predicted by Morgan Stanley for all four segments. Now, it's not the individual cost of the battery that's important, but the cost of the entire battery pack. And for the industry as a whole, the average battery pack price per kilowatt hour has fallen from $1,000 in 2010 to $227 in 2016. Tesla is a little better than that, to a little less than $190 per kilowatt hour in 2016, which was just before the Gigafactory in Nevada came online. Tesla predicts that they will get down to $100 per kilowatt hour for their battery packs by 2020, which again will advance price parity, I think, before 2025. This is a complicated table, but it's really very simple. The warranty for US cars, basic warranty, 3 years, 36,000 miles. The drivetrain, 5 years, 60,000 miles. Same for most of the Japanese cars except the premium Lexus, which is a little better. The German cars, 4 years, 50,000 miles for basic, 4 years, 50,000 miles for drivetrain. Each of the corresponding electric vehicles, the German, the American, the Japanese, are the same as the corresponding gas cars from the same manufacturers. Battery electric cars, in general, have better warranties. If you compare the Tesla in particular, the Model S and the Model X have equivalent basic warranties to the Germans, but much better drivetrain warranties. 8 years and infinite miles for the Model S and Model X, 8 years and 120,000 miles for the Model 3. And the same applies to the battery, which, as we saw, was guaranteed for 8 years and infinite miles. So how does all this translate into sales and number of cars on the road? Globally, the total global fleet of cars on the road for electric vehicles is a little over 3 million, most of which, 2/3 of which, is battery electric cars, and about 1/3 of which is plug-in hybrids. Notice the rate of rise. As far as sales go, as opposed to cars on the road, a similar ratio persists. In 2017, about 2/3 of sales were due to battery electric cars and 1/3 to plug-in hybrids. Electric cars in China are beating every other country, although I was not able to separate battery electric from plug-in electric. Way ahead of America and all the other countries. The Chinese are very serious about this. However, the market share per country is interesting because Norway is way ahead of everybody else. Almost 40% of market share sales in Norway in 2017 were electric cars, of which a little over 20% were battery electric and 18% plug-in hybrids. The United States is a miserable tail end of the fielder down here. In fact, in September and October of 2017, sales in Norway for electric cars reached 48% of total vehicle sales. So Norway has the highest per capita sales of electric cars in the world. In the US, luxury car sales in 2016 showed Tesla beating all of the Germans, 50,000 to 41,000. That's for the high-end luxuries. The low end, the Model 3, well, semi-low end, is beating out all of the gas cars, not only the Germans, but all the others, even when you lump in the Series 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the BMW gas cars and similar equivalent models of the other makers. 16,000 in July alone, compared with smaller volumes from the other manufacturers. If you look at the total battery electric cars in the US for the first and second quarter, which is the latest figure I've been able to get, all of the Tesla electrics sold almost 70,000 versus much lower figures for all of the other electric manufacturers in the US. Here are the same figures shown monthly. 78,000 for the Model 3 alone. I've grayed out the hybrids, so we go down here to 18,000 for the Model S, 17,000 and change for the Model X, 11,000 and change for the Chevy Bolt, 10,000 and change for the Leaf, 4,000 and change for the i3. So the Model 3 is cleaning up compared with all of the other electric car sales. Big Auto is making a lot of excuses about why they're not competing. Volkswagen says some of our competitors are making more progress. Competitors, i.e. Tesla. The CEO of Peugeot, Citroën, and Opel complains that electric cars are more expensive to make. The BMW CEO says that if we converted all cars to electric, the power infrastructure would not be able to handle it. The chief engineer of battery and electric systems for Jaguar and Land Rover says charging has been a really big challenge for us. And Toyota, which pioneered plug-in electrics, has committed itself to hydrogen fuel cells, which is a losing proposition. Some predictions quickly. For 2025, Forbes predicts that China will sell more than 10.5 million electric cars, plug-in and battery electric. For 2035, ING, a Dutch global financial institution, predicts by 2035, 100% of sales in Europe will be battery electric. I'm not sure about that figure, but it's probably going to be close. By 2040, total global sales are predicted to be more than half of new car sales. And by 2050, Morgan Stanley predicts there'll be 1 billion electric vehicles on the roads worldwide. There are a few current incentives for electric vehicles in the US in the form of tax credits for both battery and plug-in electrics. Currently, there's a federal tax credit that varies between $2,500 and $7,500, depending on the size and battery capacity of your vehicle. It starts to fade out 2 quarters after each automaker reaches 200,000 EVs, which Tesla has already done, and GM will soon do. There is a piece of...
I'm sorry to interrupt. This is Ken. We're running out of time, and we do have another presentation, but I'd make a proposal here. If you would like to continue going, we can run into the lunch hour a ways. Does that be acceptable to everybody?
Finished.
Okay.
I'm almost finished. This federal legislation's in committee and has little chance of passing. Various states have their own incentives. Oregon has a $2,500 incentive for EVs $50,000 or less. I lobbied hard for this, so I hope I can take a little bit of credit. In California, the credit is up to $7,000. In Colorado, up to $50,000. Now, I think probably in view of time, I might delay this to next week. The table that will help you decide which electric car to go for if you decide on an electric car. But as I expected, I had so much data that I've run out of time. So to be continued.